Hey, how you doing?
Hey, Taye, how are you?
All is well, all is well. First and foremost, thank you so much for stopping by on the platform. I really appreciate you.
No, my pleasure. And are you in Cleveland right now?
I'm in Nashville. I'm in Tennessee currently,
Oh, okay. I think your address
but
was
that's where I'm
Cleveland.
from.
I could. Okay,
Yeah,
nice.
I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. Yeah, yeah. Where you at?
I'm in Detroit, so we're basically
Oh, okay.
sister cities.
Yeah, yeah. I got family up there. Um, but yeah, like I say, this is definitely an honor. I know you got moves to make, so we'll get right into it. For the viewers who may not recognize you, let them know what your name is and definitely what do you do.
Sure. So my name's Jerry Davis. I'm a professor of management and organizations at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. I've been there since about 1998. And I oversee some programs oriented towards small business development in Detroit, helping nonprofit organizations and teaching students how to create equitable enterprises that are good for the community, good for building community wealth, and bringing about the green energy transition.
Wow. Okay. Okay. That's some amazing work. Now I can ask you now, what courses do you teach?
So I have two flavors of courses currently. So one of them is called Impact Studio, Designing Equitable Enterprises for the Just Energy Transition. So that's a class aimed at graduate students. We typically get students from about 8 different schools. So business, public health, social work, education, public policy, architecture, kinesiology, kind of this really diverse mix of students that we put together into a spicy masala of backgrounds. And what we're trying to do is teach some skills to create equitable enterprises, basically that pay fair wages, and that help their communities become more self-sufficient. And they're specifically focused on the clean energy transition. So in the previous administration, there was a lot of funding available for green energy through the Inflation Reduction Act and other innovations. And so it was just a great opportunity for neighborhood-based businesses to bring about the green energy transition. They could be installing solar panels or geothermal or doing weatherization or just helping themselves get to be, getting their own businesses to be more energy efficient. So we're trying to use the talents of our students to help bring that about. So we did that for several years. Current administration, it's a lot trickier because they are not supporting the same kind of work. So we'll see how that goes. And then I also teach a class called Leading the Responsible Corporation, and that's for executive students. They're a lot. They're older, average age about 38. So they're people that are sort of already somewhere in business in pretty responsible positions, and teaching them about how do you identify your stakeholders and understand what their interests are and find ways to help achieve the sustainable development goals that are that can sort of sing out to all the different constituencies, your employees, your customers, investors, suppliers, communities, and so on. So those are the two main things I teach.
That's definitely interesting. Now I have to ask you, when did you develop this passion for green energy and also business?
Yeah, so I was actually a philosophy and psychology major, which meant, like, my mom called it pre-unemployment because she could not see what I was going to do with those degrees. My first job out of school was as a waiter, which did not pay very well, and I ended up getting a job in research. Well, a job, it didn't pay anything, but an opportunity to volunteer doing some research. Eventually, they started paying me for it, and I went to graduate school in California at Stanford and was out there for 5 years. And that's really where I learned whatever it is that I know about business, and really thinking about how you apply social science and sociological ideas to thinking about business. So I was there for 5 years, and then I taught at Northwestern in Chicago, and then at Columbia in New York, and moved to Michigan in '98. And the green energy thing has been, I've always been, like, I've been a vegetarian since 1984. I've had a pretty long acquaintance with environmentalism, and the idea that I could actually use like my job as a professor to do research and to teach other people how to be, how to help bring about an environmental transition. That was pretty great. I didn't get to teach classes on it up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I kind of grabbed it with both hands. Although, actually, let me clarify a bit. So, about 15 years ago, I started a class on social entrepreneurship. It was basically how do you use the tools of social movements to change how companies operate. So, if you think about the ways that, like, the civil rights movement or the Arab Spring, or Black Lives Matter or the Tea Party or kind of any social movement, the way that they bring about change in society, how do we learn those lessons and apply them within a corporate setting to get companies to change what they do from the inside? So I published a book on that a few years ago and taught a class on that for several years. And I think we were ahead of our time with that, like teaching students, like, here's how to lead a social movement within your own company. And now we're seeing a real backlash against that. A lot of business leaders kind of wish their employees were not leading social movements, but we're not going to stop. Yeah, and just my own, my environmental commitments go back a long ways, but the opportunity to bring it into the classroom, that was about 4 or 5 years ago.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I've been trying to be more environmentally conscious over the last few years. So I live in Cleveland. It's a similar situation to Detroit. We have a
Mhm.
lot of abandoned homes, and they'll board
Mhm.
them up, then they'll knock them down, then there'll be like an empty lot, and then people will dump trash and weapons and all kind of stuff in there. So in 2022, I bought one, then I bought another. So now I got about three or four different lots, and then I had started the urban garden. I put the beehive in there. I got the
Huh.
chicken. So, I'm trying to, head in that direction.
Oh, that's amazing. You got to come up and visit Detroit because they have a great urban farming movement. There's um there's actually a great organization called the Black Food Security Network, and they've been going at this for, I don't know, 2 decades. They've got the beehives like you do. They've got hoop farms. They're raising animals. They're kind of doing amazing work. And about a year and a half ago, they opened up a food co-op. So, like, right on Woodward Avenue, they've got this really nice Detroit People's Food Co-op, and it's kind of great. They have this big mural of the ancestors when you walk in, and it's great because one of them I know is a professor named Jessica Gordon Nembhard. She'd be a great person for the podcast, actually. So she teaches at, I think, City University of New York, and she wrote this book called Collective Courage about the Black cooperative movement. Uh, and she first published it 10 years ago, and it really took off. It really caught people's attention to think about sort of cooperative economic thought and uh, how underappreciated um, the institutions built by Black people in America were at cooperative economic thought. So she wrote this book. There's this lovely painting, and they're all kind of in black and white. And then there's this one color picture, and it's Jessica Gordon Nemhard. And I think, I know her. She's amazing.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna definitely try to check that out. I'm gonna reach out and see if I can find her. I appreciate you sharing that. That's very inspiring as well. Now you do have I wanted to ask you about your latest book, Taming Corporate Power in the 21st Century. If you could talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been very worried about the concentration of power in a small number of tech companies. It makes me really anxious that every day, like, I use a phone from Apple and software from Google and Microsoft, and order things on Amazon, that a pretty small number of companies really control the main mechanisms we have to communicate with each other, to shop, to get entertainment, to find out information. It feels very, gives me a lot of anxiety to think that just like 5 or 6 companies on the West Coast in the US have this incredible control over the tools we have to talk to each other and to find literature and to shop and connect with each other. And so I was worried about that, and I wanted to come up with a thoughtful diagnosis of, like, how is corporate power different today than it was in the 20th century. So, like, all my grandparents moved to Detroit to work in the car factories. Both my grandfathers moved up. My father's father grew up in Indiana on a farm, and then he got drafted into the First World War. When he got out, he said, I am not going back to Indiana to grow corn. Like, I'm going to make my fortune in Detroit. So he moved to Detroit and worked on the Model T factory in Highland Park and learned to be a welder, which is, a good skilled trade. And he stayed there for 50 years. So he worked at the Ford Motor Company until like eventually at the Rouge plant till the late 60s when they were making Mustangs. So like the whole family really moved to Detroit as part of this industrial migration because there was good money to be made there. When you think about corporate power in the 20th century, you think about big employers like GM and Ford or AT&T or Sears or something like that. There's so like major employers um, that that operated large scale facilities, and you could imagine how you would organize something like that, like how you might unionize it and what the opportunity structure looked like for people to get ahead in their jobs. Well, that's kind of fallen apart. We no longer really have big employers that look like that. Today, something like 8 of the biggest employers are in retail, and they just don't pay well. They don't necessarily provide good benefits or career ladders. So it's a really different looking economy. So what I wanted to do was to figure out, like, where does power come from today? And that led me to to dig into what's different about big tech companies compared to big business. Like, we used to talk about the Fortune 500 and say, well, the powerful businesses are the Fortune 500, like the manufacturers with the largest revenues, like Eastman Kodak or Xerox or IBM or GE. And now, most people don't know what those companies are. Like, we don't really have those kinds of large scale employers the way that we used to. And the source of power isn't so much having a lot of revenues or being a big employer as much as it is kind of controlling the wires, controlling the screens that stand between us, like the mechanisms that we use to connect with each other. And it's not 500 companies, it's really 5 or 6 or 7. So Google, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, maybe Nvidia and Tesla. They're like incredibly powerful, and all those people could fit in one car together. And the idea that so much power is concentrated in the hands of such a small group, like I said, it gave me a lot of anxiety, and it seems very undemocratic. um, and if you were tracking um, the inauguration in January, they're in the front row were the CEOs of 4 of the big tech companies. It's like Elon Musk and the CEO of Google and Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos from Amazon. And that is not something that Americans love to have that much power, economic power and political power concentrated in the same hands. And so the book is really intended to track, how do we get to this situation? Like, what was it about technologies, the evolution of technologies that got us into this situation? This is going to sound a little bit psychedelic, but I have a story behind it, which is um, that if you think about, like, what does it take to create a business? You need labor, you need capital, you need distribution, a way to get things into the hands of customers, you need supplies, you need some kind of legal form and a way to put all the parts together. And each of those markets has really been transformed by information and communication technologies in ways that favor doing things outside the company instead of inside. So today, the average cost to provide health insurance for a corporate health insurance plan on average costs $22,000 a year to give a head of household health insurance for themselves and their family. Like, that's insane. That's such a huge amount of money. That's more than the average annual pay at Walmart. So it costs them more to give health insurance than how much it costs them to pay someone for the year. So that's pretty extreme. And so companies see that and they say, well, we don't want to have employees then. Like it's cheaper to just use contractors or temps. And so that gives you the rise of business models like Uber or DoorDash, or using contractors or temporary employees rather than full-time employees. When that happens across the whole economy, we end up with this situation where we're very atomized, where like I had one of my students did her dissertation at looking at Uber and Lyft drivers, and they often think of themselves as entrepreneurs. They're self-employed. They're like the CEO of this company of one, which is great, but they don't really have a lot of economic security. And there's nowhere to move up. If you're an Uber driver, you don't get promoted to boss of the Uber drivers. Like it's basically that's the job you've got, and the pay is never going to go up. And that's that whole model was enabled by the smartphone. It's like this that would have Uber would have been impossible in 2006 because people didn't have smartphones. So 2007 they introduced the iPhone, and the idea that drivers and riders have phones with GPS and they can find each other online, that would have been impossible without the smartphone. All of a sudden, that's what labor markets look like. Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and Fiverr, like it's really transformed what employment looks like in the US. So the book in a compact way tries to talk about capital markets, labor markets, supply, distribution, and all of them have been transformed by technology and where that leads us. And where it leaves us right now is in a pretty precarious place. There's not a lot of things that give you uh, security or there's a lot of precarity. Like you don't necessarily get health insurance from your job. You don't necessarily know how many hours you're going to get. And that's kind of the situation we're in now. Um, and yeah, and what's going on in Washington and in the US is not making me more optimistic that it's going to be fixed. Anyway, that was a long answer to your question. Sorry about that.
No, no, it's all good. I mean, you were sharing a lot of information, and I'm still processing it, but I definitely understand what you're saying. Now, I can ask you this: have you received any pushback, for the subject?
Yeah, a little bit. So, and I think there's one thing that I really got wrong in the book. So I think I got most of the sort of the factual information in the stories. I got those right. At the time I was writing it, was in 2021, and it was like just when the new administration came in. I said antitrust does not give you the tools that you need to take on these new forms of corporate power. So my thought was like, what do we have to do if we want to rein in big tech companies, if we want to get them to behave themselves and to be sort of democratically responsive to what the people want? Like, how do we do that? And I did not think that antitrust was the right way to go about it, because just it didn't antitrust felt like it works good. It works well if it's like steel companies or tobacco or rubber companies or something like that from 100 years ago, but it didn't feel like a good fit for something like Google. I mean, they manufacture phones, but they also have Google Search, and they own like YouTube. Like they're in so many different businesses that it didn't feel like that antitrust is going to be the right set of tools. And I really got that one wrong. I gotta say, I hardly ever get to admit that I'm wrong, but here I am on your podcast saying, yeah, I think I got that one wrong. That Lena Khan, who is the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, Jonathan Cantor at the Department of Justice, they went at it hammer and tongs. Like they were not scared of anyone. They took on the biggest companies. They took on big tech. And even with the current administration, the lawsuits are still going on. So there's a pretty good chance that, within the next weeks, Google would get broken up, that they might make them, split off YouTube, split off the Chrome browser. They might actually end up, splitting them into smaller companies, which I never thought would happen. But, hats off. I got that part wrong. So that was the main pushback was the feeling that I underestimated antitrust. And I have to say, yep, I did. So I'm okay being humble about that.
Oh, okay. That's definitely understandable. And that's interesting as well. Now, you said it came out around 21, 22, but how long did it take you to actually complete the book? How long were you working on it?
Took about a year and a half. So I was on. We have a great thing in academia that professors get a sabbatical um, if you're at the right university. So I love my university, University of Michigan. Sorry, I know you're in Ohio, or we're in Ohio, but uh, but we have a norm that, like, when you spend 6 or 7 years in the classroom, then they give you like a semester off where you can just not teach and just work on your own thing. And I saved up enough credit that I got an opportunity to spend the year in California. This is 2020 21. So you may remember that's when COVID was still raging. We were driving across the country uh, while COVID was going on, wearing masks everywhere and worrying about the hotel rooms we were staying at because there was no vaccine yet. So we moved out there over the summer. And I just spent the year working on this book, and I had to read, dozens of articles, a bunch of books. I just spent a lot of time bringing myself up to speed on antitrust and thinking about corporate power, and then writing the book itself took, a few months. I'm a pretty fast writer, and it's a reasonably short book. Like, for me anyway, it's a lot shorter than my other books, which there's 5 of them. This is the short one that's pretty readable. So I'd say all in probably a year and a half.
Wow, okay, that's some great work. Now, can I ask you this? You've been teaching for a while, and you mentioned how I guess business was a few decades ago with like General Motors and Ford. But how are your students receptive to this information? Like you say about corporate power, like you say, Google might have YouTube and Chrome. Are they understanding of I guess, the magnitude of what that could mean for America?
Yeah, I would say the students that I teach, I tend to get students from uh, who are more sympathetic to that message. So 10 years ago, I was teaching a required class, which everybody that shows up in the building, all of our undergraduate students had to take this class. And so there I didn't have much. Basically, whoever came in the door, I was teaching them. Now, both of the main classes I teach are electives. So the students take them voluntarily. And if they're not going to be receptive to my message, they're probably not going to show up. That's mostly true of the class I mentioned on the green energy transition. The executive students, I get more of a wide selection of them. They have different perspectives. What I try and do is, meet them where they are. I don't I don't in any way expect them to believe whatever I say. I mean, I'm very clear that they don't have to agree with me at all. Like, I like pushback from them. I like discussions. I don't mind arguing in class. So I try to be, I let them know I have an opinion about things, and they're going to know what it is, but they don't have to agree with my opinion. They just have to show up prepared, do the work, and stand up for their arguments. So they don't always agree with me, and that's great. As long as we can have like a civil, thoughtful, factual discussion in class, then I feel uh, pretty comfortable about that. And they don't mind telling me when I'm wrong or when they think I'm wrong. So as long as I can create a context where they all feel comfortable engaging in that dialogue, I'm pretty happy with that.
Definitely, definitely. Because I just think about it because it is convenient to have all of those things in one place and be able to go to one source to get it. But I guess at least when I grew up, everybody didn't have internet, everybody didn't have a computer, so I got to see what life was like a little bit beforehand, where like the people that was born maybe in the last 20 years is always kind of been like that, you know.
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, you see kids now and they've never been without a smartphone. Like, at least my kids grew up mostly without them, at least till they got into like high school or later. And now you see people pushing their baby down the street and they've got a phone in front of them or an iPad and they're playing with it. So, yeah, we're raising a really different generation now. And that's, I
Yeah.
mean, that sort of highlights what the danger is like if what your kids understand about the world, if 2/3 of it is coming through a screen, you gotta worry like who's controlling what shows up on that screen.
Yeah, yeah, that's something to think about. Definitely. Okay, we're about 25 minutes in, so maybe I'll ask you about maybe one of your articles, Through a Glass Darkly, how
Yeah.
securities disclosures give a distorted view of the economy. If you could speak about that a little bit.
Yeah, so that's I hardly ever get to put biblical references in my title, but that one, Through a Glass Darkly, I think was one of the letters of St. Paul. Um, the idea is that, like, when we try to make a map of the economy, like when we try to understand how all the parts of the economy fit together, it's hard because we don't have airplanes flying over the economy that can tell us here's where the land masses are, here's where the houses are. We have to kind of put together a map based on things like surveys or tax filings, things like that. And what that paper is talking about is, um, for the last 100 something years, an awful lot of the American economy consists of companies that sell shares to the public. They're listed on a stock market like the New York Stock Exchange or Nasdaq. And when they do that, they issue stocks and bonds, which together are called securities. And if you're going to sell stock to the public, the Securities and Exchange Commission requires you to file a bunch of reports every quarter, every year. You have to release a bunch of information about yourself. Um, and the point of that article is that the kind of information they release is really tilted towards financial information and not almost nothing about the people who actually work in the company, even how many employees they have. It's pretty limited how much they disclose. And so when economists or other people try to make a map of the economy, one way to do that is to take every company's annual report, the filings that they put together, and turn that into a map. And what I argue in the paper is that, um, there's this old joke about somebody, a drunk, looking for his keys under a streetlight. He's asked, like, "Why are you looking into the street light? Is that where you left him?" He goes, "No, but this is where the light is." So, that's academics love that idea because sometimes, like, well, we have a lot of information about companies listed on the stock market. We have hardly any information about everybody else. The idea of trying to understand how the economy works by only looking at the securities filings, um, that's where things are going to turn wrong. So it's in a law review. It's pretty nerdy, but it's trying to lay out, like, here's why you can come up with a really distorted view of the economy and how it works if that's the kind of information you've got. So, and I talk about a couple of parts of it. One of it is about, our industry is all dominated by one or two companies or not. And then the second part is about employment and, like, where the jobs are, um, and why we have such bad information about things like that.
Okay, okay. These are definitely some interesting subjects. Now, have you ever considered doing a documentary about any of the work that you're doing?
Um, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, actually, there's a video I did about 10 years ago that was on PBS NewsHour, and it's like shot in Detroit near my place, um, in a work, like in an abandoned factory, and in a business incubator, and in a maker space. It's about 10 minutes long, so not quite a documentary, but no, but it was still pretty fun to do. Um, my worry is I'm not sure how many people would find it interesting enough. uh, I would be happy to do it. I'm not sure if there's an audience for this kind of thing, but I could be wrong. I don't know. What do you think?
Man, I don't know. Like you were saying about the just the example you had gave with Google, a lot of people don't understand that, and how it works and how it could affect us in the long run and how America was designed to have, a certain level of balance. If a handful of people own all of the corporations and everything like that, cause an imbalance, and it can change the future, So.
If anybody calls me up and wants to do a documentary, I'll talk to them for sure.
Right, right. Well, like I said again, thank you so much for coming on the platform. This has definitely been a thought-provoking episode, and I really appreciate the work that you have done, going green and all that stuff. And I look forward to the work that you have coming in the future as well.
No, thanks, Taye. I really enjoyed speaking with you and look forward to seeing your podcast come out.